So winter poses some unique challenges when you're out in temps at or below freezing, and you have to figure out a routine to deal with some really unique problems that winter camping presents. And every year on my first trip, I have to kind of learn again a few of those lessons. And so I wanted to go over my winter tent routine and just walk people through it, so that this winter when you're out, you can try a few things and work through some things. I've gotten a lot of questions, especially after I posted my my winter goat hunting list. So I'm out just testing some new gear I can't really talk about right now tonight. So that's kind of my first night out. It's supposed to be, I think, -3 or 4, so pretty cold. First thing is I'm in a shelter, and so the shelter is going to keep the temperature a little warmer inside than it is outside. The second thing, I'm going to have an inflatable ground pad, and that ground pad is going to be at least an R value of 4. You're better off if you have a 6, a 7, or an 8 R value. This one happens to be 7. The next thing is I'm going to sleep in my clothing. So I'm going to sleep in my clothing except my rain gear, and I'm going to integrate that into my sleeping system. So this sleeping bag's a 15 degree. I don't really recommend that for people that are unexperienced, but I know my complete system working together is going to keep me warm in these below zero temps tonight. So I've got a ground pad, a tent, my sleeping system, which is clothing and the bag combined. The next thing is you have to figure out what to do with your boots. So I'm a huge proponent of double boots. So these are my liners for my ski boots. That double boot allows you to take the liner out, put the liner in your bag, or put them on your feet. But if you don't have a double boot, then you have to figure out what to do with your boots. And so what I recommend is you take your boots, you knock off the snow, you lay them on top of your ground pad behind you, and you're going to use that as the base of a pillow. The next thing we'll do, so that'll insulate them from the ground. The next thing we'll do is we have to keep water from freezing. So we're going to take my 5-liter bladder of water that I melted all the snow before dark. I'm going to take that bladder, I'm going to put it on top of those boots, and then I'm going to lay my sleeping bag on top of that. And so insulate it off the ground with my body heat, and the sleeping bag on top of that is going to keep the boots hopefully from freezing if you're not wearing a double boot, but they are going to be cold, right? And so that's one of the biggest issues, and we'll talk about how to fix that here in the end. The next thing is, if you're going to be running a Nalgene, which I always like to have a Nalgene, if you're not going to put it in your sleeping bag, you need to put it in an insulated parka, and you need to put it in upside down, so that when it starts to freeze, which it will in these temps, it's going to freeze at the bottom where the airspace is, and it's not going to freeze at the mouth, so you can still access the water. But I'm a huge proponent of boiling that water before I go to bed, after I've eaten, and I put that in my sleeping bag as an external heat source, and I'm going to use that water in the morning to warm up my boots. The next thing is you have to figure out what to do with your fuel canisters if you're not running a liquid fuel stove. Cold is the Achilles heel of these canisters. You have to keep them warm. So when you're done, you have to either put it in the jacket or your puffy jacket, or you have to put it in your sleeping bag. The reality is, when you're out in the winter, you put a lot of stuff in your sleeping bag. You sleep with a lot of junk rattling around in your sleeping bag, but that's really the only effective way to keep it warm. And then in the morning, this is going to be warm enough that I can actually use the stove. But if I just set this out in the snow and the cold, there's a chance that my stove may not even run, because the pressure is going to decrease as the temperatures decrease. So that pressure is going to go down. So I'm going to put that inside my bag. The next thing is I'm going to make sure that my socks are dry, or my feet are dry. So I'm going to change my socks into dry socks at night when I get in my bag. I'm going to take the damp ones, I'm going to put those either in the pockets of my puffy jacket, or I'm going to put those in the bottom of my sleeping bag to dry out at night. And we just alternate that every night. If you're hunting and you have a weapon, you're going to want to keep the weapon in the vestibule, especially a rifle. It's going to be warmer inside the tent, like I mentioned, and that rifle is going to be really cold. And if you bring it inside and it warms up, it's going to do what's called sweating. And then when you go back in the cold in the morning, the optics are going to ice up, the trigger, the bolt, all those things can ice up, and you can have malfunctions and problems with the gun. So you want to make sure that the gun's cold and stays cold. The next thing is I want to ventilate my tent. So if I don't ventilate my tent well, I'm going to wake up, there's going to be condensation in here, it's going to be frost, it's going to be raining on me, you know, and I'm going to get wet. Because of that, if it's a little warmer, there's going to be water vapor and condensation building up. So you want to make sure you vent your tent at the top. And if it's not windy or blowing, I'm going to keep this tent open quite a bit, because as I'm breathing out, I'm putting moisture out. I've got snow inside the tent. My clothes are drying. All those things are going to put condensation. I want to ventilate that tent really well. The last thing is I'm going to eat right before I go to bed. So that's going to fire up my metabolic engine. So I'm going to move around, I'm going to get in my bag, I'm going to eat, and then I'm going to go to bed. I don't want to eat several hours prior to going to bed and burn those calories that I could be using to warm myself and warm this environment inside the tent and the sleeping bag. And then when I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm going to use that Ziploc that I ate my food out of, field stripped in a Ziploc. I'm going to piss in that Ziploc so I don't have to get out of the tent. I don't have to dump all this heat that I've spent hours generating to get out of the tent and expose myself to the elements. I'm going to piss in the Ziploc, and then I'm going to take that Ziploc in the morning, especially if I'm with friends. I'm going to take it to a designated latrine, and I'm going to dump it there. And the last thing is I'm going to eat a candy bar. I'm going to have a Snickers or a Protect bar or some kind of simple sugar, high calorie, just like you would throw a pine log on the fire at night. When you wake up and the fire's burned down, you throw a pine log on, it fires up, it gives you a couple more hours of warmth in the cabin before you have to wake up. It's the same thing with your body. My metabolic engine's running low. I burn those calories from my meal. I'm going to eat that. It's going to fire me up. I'm going to piss, and I'm going to be able to get a couple more hours of sleep before I wake up. So anyways, that's my tent routine. Wanted to go over it. It's the beginning of winter. Hope you guys are going to get out there, have some adventures, try some of these things, figure out your own tent routine. You have to be very disciplined in the winter because there are some unique challenges you have to figure out. But, you know, I think this will be a good place to start, and then everyone can kind of modify it from there to suit their own needs.